Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. I suspect that most of you understand English, so I will give my homily in English. If there are folks who don't understand English, I hope that you will find someone who will be willing to tell you in Russian what I propose to say today. We are celebrating, actually we're celebrating the 2nd of July, the repose of one of the greatest saints of the 20th century. Our father among the saints, John, Archbishop of Shanghai and San Francisco. The founder and organizer of our parish in 1949. And just recently we celebrated the 75th anniversary of our parish, and now we are in the 76th year. And thanks to the prayers of St. John, our parish is growing and, in a certain sense, flourishing. I'm convinced that this is because of St. John. He came here to Washington in 1949 to lobby our legislators, the House of Representatives and the Senate, to get his people, his flock that were stranded on the Filipino island of Tubabao, to get them released and settled in countries in the West. These poor souls were mostly from China, where there was a huge Russian community formed even before the revolution. But of course, after the revolution, the numbers of Russians in China multiplied. They were fleeing the godless Bolsheviks, who were unmercilessly killing so many people who were faithful to Imperial Russia. So they fled for their lives and, of course, established a huge community in many of the major cities of China. In fact, the community was so large that the Synod of Bishops that were living in exile in Yugoslavia, or Serbia now, formed a large diocese in China, and a young hieromonk by the name of John, who was living in a Serbian town of Bitol, where he was the beloved teacher in a local seminary. He was called to serve the church in a new manner, in a hierarchical rank, and sent to Shanghai to serve the Russian community, Orthodox community there. He wasn't the only one. There was Metropolitan Mileti, Bishop Victor, and a couple of other bishops. But of course, the most outstanding one was St. John. And there are a myriad of fascinating stories of his life and service in China. I won't go into them because they're just too numerous. I would probably miss some of them, but you can all look up in the internet his life, and we have a book in English on St. John, which is very helpful to study his life. You probably all know of his wonderful feats. You probably know from stories that people wrote down about some of these feats. And I think one of the most effective ways of driving home certain truths about a saint is to witness to his actions in your own life. And if you don't mind, I'd like to share a few stories of St. John and what role he played in my life and in the life of my spouse, Matushka Masha. In 1969, I think it was, my mother and I were to travel to Russia, to the Soviet Union, to visit our relatives who were living in Ukraine. However, we couldn't get a visa because there was a large congress of communists in Moscow, and we were denied a visa. And here I was stuck. I had a summer ahead of me. It was too late to find a job. We were denied our trip to Russia. And I very much wanted to travel to the Holy Land, to Mount Athos and to the Holy Land. So I received a visa for Greece and to the Holy Land, and I went to Mount Athos, and I visited the monasteries there, and the monasteries were so beautiful, so full of spirituality, that when my trip to Greece ended and I went to the Holy Land, my mind and heart were filled with monastic feelings. I thought that maybe this is my vocation. So I went to the Holy Land, and I met up with a group of pilgrims from New York, headed by then Archbishop Loris, who later became the first hierarch of ROCOR, Russian Church Abroad. And at the same time, there was a group of pilgrims, a large group of pilgrims from Paris, mostly young people. And oftentimes our two groups would meet at certain holy places. And of course they came to the women's convent. We had two convents in the Holy Land. And we got to meet the people from Paris. And after a midnight liturgy at the Holy Sepulchre, we were waiting. This was a few days before the Feast of the Remission of the Mother of God. And we were waiting for the procession, which happens every year from the Holy Sepulchre to the Via della Rosa, the Way of the Cross, to the tomb of the Mother of God. And I was sitting in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre waiting for this procession, and I was thinking to myself, I am so thirsty. I wish I could get something to drink, a bottle of water. But, you know, in the Holy Land churches, they don't have machines where you can go and put $1 in and get a bottle of water. So I was sitting there a little bit miserable, and a young lady came up to me and offered me a cup of water. Her name was Maria, Masha. And at first I refused, but then the thirst was so great that I took the water, drank it with gusto. I gave the cup back to her. She was about to leave, and I felt uncomfortable. She was so nice. She gave me the water. So I offered for her to sit down next to me. And we didn't sit for a long time. We didn't really talk for a long time, but somebody came and said the procession is beginning. And again, I ran ahead, and then I felt uncomfortable. I came back and I offered to accompany Maria on the procession. So during the procession, we got to know each other. We were talking, and we were so engaged in talking that we ended up at the end of the procession. But we finally made it to the church of the burial place of the Mother of God. And after that, we began to see each other very often. And during our conversations, I found out that Maria's father, he was a deacon back then, proto-deacon. He served with St. John for over 10 years when he was the ruling bishop in Europe. I thought, how interesting. I met this girl whose father served St. John for over a decade. The pilgrimage came to an end. I went back to seminary, and Maria and I began corresponding. And after that, during Christmas vacation, I went to Paris to meet her parents. And the very first day in Paris, I proposed to her. And she became my wife a year later, and then my matushka after I was ordained a priest. So I met up with a young lady who knew St. John during her childhood. I found that to be quite interesting, and then not a coincidence. And backing up a little bit, when I graduated from high school in 1967, I was faced with the decision of going to university or going to seminary. I was very much church by then. I was about 17, 18. And I was torn. On the one hand, I wanted to receive a secular education, to get a job, because most priests back then had to work, because our parishes were not rich. But then at the same time, I thought, well, in 1967, this was the height of all the turmoil in universities during the Vietnam War. And the drugs were available anywhere, and people weren't really into academics. And I thought that, God forbid, if I went to university, I might even lose my faith. So the choice was made after I had a dream. And in this dream, St. John appeared to me. And he didn't say much, but I remember he was pointing to the east. I was in Cleveland then, and of course the east meant the monastery, the seminary. And when I woke up the next morning, I was convinced that this was a dream from God, because you have to always be very, very careful, because we can be fooled by the enemy of our salvation. He can send us sweet dreams, thinking that this is from God, but in truth it's from Satan. But I was sure that this was St. John pointing to Jordanville. So I entered the seminary, and I graduated, and I became a deacon. I served in Nyack, New York for 3 years, and then I received the priesthood and served another 3 years in Stratford, Connecticut. And at the same time, I was working in New York, smuggling religious books into Russia. It was a CIA operation. But after a while, the funding for this job was cut, and I had to desperately find a new position. And again, St. John appeared to me in a dream and told me that very soon I would receive a position of great responsibility. He didn't say specifically what it was, but soon after that, I was given a job at the Voice of America shortwave radio station, the Russian service. And I began a religious broadcast, a 45-minute original broadcast which was repeated 5 times every week. And later on, this broadcast became so popular that the administration gave me 2 45-minute broadcast every week. So I was very busy, and I had to leave Stratford, Connecticut, and move to Washington, D.C. Little did I know, when I was moving here to Washington, D.C., that this parish, where I became a second priest to Father Nikolai Pekatoros, who was the rector, this parish was founded by St. John of Shanghai and San Francisco. This was the only parish in America which he founded. And of course, he was here for several months in 1949, lobbying Congress on behalf of his flock to get them to come to America. I could tell many more stories about St. John's influence in my life, but I think this will suffice. You are all tired. Maybe one day I'll write them all down, because the Lord instructs us we should not hide the wonderful deeds of the Lord in our life, but we should witness to them without pride, but in all humility. Because glorious is God and his saints, and we should all remember whenever we receive a gift from God through his saints, we should share these stories, because this is the most effective way of increasing our love for the wonderful saints that we have in our Holy Orthodox Church. So I once again greet you on this second, if you will, second patronal feast day, because of course St. John is our second patron saint. St. John the Baptist, of course, is the most important, and St. John of Shanghai is the second. And it's interesting that today we're celebrating St. John of Shanghai, and on Monday we will be celebrating the Nativity of St. John the Forerunner, our patron saint, just in a couple of days. What a wonderful coincidence, if you will. But of course, in God's world, there are no coincidences. It's only God's providence which organizes everything in our life. After the kissing of the cross, you are all welcome next door, and our St. John of Shanghai Brotherhood is offering a brunch for everyone. So please come and celebrate St. John's Brotherhood's feast day as well. The blessing of the Lord be upon you through his grace and love for mankind, always, now, and ever, and unto the